Right now, something is changing, and most people do not see it yet. The food you trust, the shelves you depend on, and the prices you ignore are all shifting at the same time. This is how every crisis begins, quietly, before panic spreads. Inflation is squeezing supply, systems are slowing, and the foods that matter most are starting to disappear without warning. This is not about fear tomorrow. This is about action today. If you wait for proof, you will wait too long. The moment to prepare is not coming. It is already here. Number 1. Oats. When systems begin to fail, the foods that disappear first are not always the ones people expect. Oats are a perfect example. They sit quietly on shelves, often ignored, seen as boring or old-fashioned. Most people walk past them without a second thought, assuming they will always be there. That assumption is dangerous. In times of economic stress and food disruption, oats become one of the most valuable foods you can have, and that is exactly why they vanish faster than anyone predicts. Oats are not just breakfast food. They are energy, stability, and survival packed into a simple grain. They store well, last long, and can feed a family for weeks with very little preparation. When money is tight and choices shrink, oats stretch meals in a way few foods can. This is why, during every major crisis, demand quietly surges. People may not rush for oats on day one, but when other grains disappear or prices double, oats suddenly become the fallback. By then, shelves are already thin. What most people do not realize is how fragile oat production actually is. Oats depend on stable weather, predictable harvests, fuel for farming equipment, and long-distance transportation. Inflation raises the cost of every step in that chain. Farmers plant less when profit disappears. Transport slows when fuel costs rise. Processing plants cut output when margins tighten. None of this makes headlines, but it all reduces supply. When demand spikes, there is no cushion. History shows this pattern clearly. In past economic downturns, oats were one of the first grains to be rationed or quietly removed from stores. Not because they were rare, but because they were practical. Families relied on them when bread became expensive and meat became a luxury. Governments and institutions know this. When instability grows, bulk buyers move early, securing supply long before the public reacts. By the time everyday shoppers notice price changes, the best options are already gone. There is also a psychological trap with oats. People believe they can always switch to them later. They assume oats are a backup, something to grab if things get worse. That mindset leaves people exposed. When panic finally reaches oats, it moves fast. Prices jump, limits appear, and quality drops. What remains is often overprocessed, overpriced, or unavailable altogether. This is why oats matter now, not later. They represent a food that bridges comfort and survival. They keep you full, give steady energy, and reduce dependence on fragile systems. In a crisis, that kind of reliability is priceless. Waiting until everyone else realizes this turns a smart choice into a desperate scramble. If you want one clear signal of where the system is headed, watch what happens to oats. When they start disappearing, it means the pressure has already crossed a dangerous line. The smartest move is not to wait for that signal, but to act before it arrives. Preparing now is not panic. Eat is control. Number 2. Salt. Salt is one of the most overlooked foods in modern life, and that is exactly why it becomes priceless during crisis. Most people treat salt as background noise, something that will always exist, something too basic to worry about. It is cheap, easy to find, and taken for granted. But history tells a very different story. When systems break down, salt is never just seasoning. It becomes preservation, health, control, and survival all at once. In stable times, salt feels invisible because supply chains hide its importance. It arrives effortlessly, mined, processed, packaged, and delivered without interruption. But salt depends on energy, machinery, transport, and labor like any other resource. When fuel prices rise, when transport slows, when industrial systems tighten, salt production and delivery suffer quietly. Because it is bulky and low margin, companies cut back without warning. Shelves thin slowly, tends to then leak. What makes salt critical is not taste, but function. Salt preserves food when refrigeration fails or becomes unreliable. It allows meat, vegetables, and other foods to last longer when waste becomes dangerous. In every historical shortage, salt was guarded, traded, and rationed because it extended life. Without it, food spoils faster, nutrition suffers, and desperation rises. This is why armies, governments, and institutions secure salt early, long before civilians realize they need it. There is also a health side people ignore. Salt regulates fluids in the body. When diets become limited and stress increases, electrolyte balance matters more than ever. Shortages of salt do not cause panic at first, but they weaken people quietly. Fatigue rises, illness spreads faster, small problems become big ones. This is why salt shortages often accompany deeper collapse, even if they never make the news. Another danger is how people buy salt. Because it is cheap, they assume they can grab it later. They do not stock it intentionally. They buy small amounts, trusting constant availability. When panic finally hits, salt disappears, almost overnight. People rush to stores only to find limits, empty shelves, or inflated prices. By then, the system has already moved on, prioritizing bulk buyers and reserves over individuals. Salt has been used as money, power, and leverage throughout history. Wars were fought over it. Trade routes existed because of it. The modern world forgot that lesson because convenience replaced awareness. But crises brings old truths back fast. When food systems tighten, salt is no longer optional. It becomes essential. This is why waiting is dangerous. Salt does not disappear loudly. It fades away quietly, while people focus on flashier shortages. By the time it becomes obvious, access is already restricted. Preparing now means thinking beyond taste and comfort and focusing on function and survival. Stockpiling salt is not dramatic. It is not exciting, but it is one of the smartest moves you can make. In a collapsing system, the smallest items often carry the greatest power. Number 3. Sugar. Sugar is often dismissed as unnecessary or unhealthy, which is exactly why people fail to see its importance during crisis. In stable times, sugar feels optional. In unstable times, it becomes energy, preservation, morale, and trade. History shows again and again that when food systems weaken, sugar disappears fast. Not because people crave sweets, but because sugar fills gaps no other food can. At its core, sugar is fast energy. When diets shrink and protein becomes scarce, quick calories matter. Sugar keeps people moving when meals are smaller and options are limited. During shortages, the body needs simple fuel to function under stress. This is why sugar has always been part of emergency rations and military supplies. It is not about indulgence. It is about survival. Sugar is also deeply tied to food preservation. It allows fruits to be stored longer, foods to be conserved, and waste to be reduced. In times when refrigeration becomes unreliable or expensive, sugar helps extend the life of other foods. Without it, people lose a powerful tool that protects calories already in their possession. This makes sugar far more valuable in crisis than most people realize. The modern sugar supply is far more fragile than it appears. Production depends on water, fuel, labor, and global trade. Weather disruptions hit sugar crops hard. Energy costs raise processing prices. Transportation delays slow delivery. None of this feels urgent until shelves suddenly empty. When shortages begin, sugar vanishes fast because people buy it emotionally. Comfort, fear, and habit all drive demand at once. There is also a psychological role sugar plays. In hard times, people seek familiarity and comfort. Sugar-based foods provide emotional relief when stress is constant. This causes panic, buy-in long before actual scarcity becomes visible. When fear spreads, sugar becomes one of the first items hoarded, even by those who never cared about it before. History makes this pattern clear. During past rationing periods, sugar was tightly controlled because it held value beyond nutrition. It could be traded, stored, and stretched. When sugar disappeared, morale dropped and desperation grew. Modern consumers underestimate this because they have never lived without it. That ignorance becomes vulnerability when the system tightens. People assume sugar will always be cheap. That belief is already failing. Prices have climbed steadily, and package sizes have quietly shrunk. Once panic sets in, price is no longer the main barrier. Availability is. When sugar is gone, it does not return quickly because production cannot instantly increase. This is why sugar belongs in serious preparation plans. Not as a luxury, but as a tool. It supports energy, preservation, and morale when everything else is under pressure. Waiting until fear spreads means paying more or going without. Sugar does not disappear slowly. It vanishes in waves. The first wave is price. The second is limits. The third is absence. Acting before the first wave is the difference between control and regret. Number 4. Powdered milk. Powdered milk is one of those foods people rarely think about until it is gone. In normal times, it sits quietly on shelves, ignored in favor of fresh options. That calm hides how critical it becomes when systems begin to strain. That increases powdered milk shifts from an afterthought to a lifeline, especially for families, children, and anyone needing reliable nutrition when fresh food becomes scarce or expensive. Milk, in any form, depends on a fragile system. Dairy farms rely on feed, water, fuel, labor, and constant transport. When inflation rises and costs increase, dairy production is often the first to shrink. Fresh milk disappears quickly because it spoils fast and requires refrigeration at every step. Powdered milk survives longer, stores easier, and becomes the fallback. That sudden demand overwhelms supply almost instantly. What most people do not realize is that powdered milk is not produced in unlimited quantities. It is processed in specialized facilities that cannot ramp up production overnight. When institutions, aid programs, and emergency reserves step in, they buy in bulk. Civilians are left with what remains, and that remainder disappears fast. This happens quietly, without headlines or warnings. Powdered milk matters because it provides something few shelf-stable foods do. It offers balanced nutrition, protein, fats, and minerals, all in one simple form. In long emergencies, nutritional gaps weaken people before hunger does. Children suffer first. Energy drops, health problems increase. Powdered milk helps slow that decline, which is why it becomes so valuable when times are hard. There is also an emotional aspect people underestimate. Milk represents normal life. Routine, comfort. When stress is constant, familiar foods help people cope. Powdered milk allows families to maintain basic habits, even when fresh options are gone. That sense of stability matters more than people realize until it disappears. History shows that dairy shortages often signal deeper trouble. When powdered milk becomes difficult to find, it means supply chains are already under severe stress. Recovery is slow because rebuilding dairy herds and processing capacity takes time. Shortages linger long after the initial crisis. Passage, people assume powdered milk is a niche item. That belief keeps them from acting early. By the time demand spikes, shelves empty almost overnight. Prices rise sharply, and quality drops. What remains is often rationed or unavailable. Preparing now is about recognizing value before panic reveals it. Powdered milk is not exciting, but it is powerful. It stretches meals, supports health, and provides comfort when systems fail. Waiting until fear spreads means competing with institutions that always move first. When powdered milk starts disappearing, it is already late. Acting before that moment gives you options when others have none. Number 5. Honey. Honey is one of the oldest survival foods known to humans. Yet in modern life, it is treated like a luxury or a flavor choice. That misunderstanding is dangerous. In times of crisis, honey stops being a sweetener and becomes energy, medicine, preservation, and trade all at once. What makes honey powerful is also what makes it disappear quickly when systems begin to strain. Unlike most foods, honey does not spoil. Properly stored, it can last for years without losing its value. That alone makes it rare in a world built on short shelf lives and constant risk. When shortages hit and people realize which foods actually last, honey suddenly moves from ignored to essential. Demand rises fast, and supply cannot keep up. The supply side of honey is far more fragile than most people realize. Honey depends entirely on healthy bee populations, stable weather, and clean environments. Right now, bees are under pressure from climate stress, habitat loss, and disease. Every year, production becomes more uncertain. When output drops even slightly, prices rise sharply because honey cannot be manufactured or rushed. It takes time, seasons, and balance to produce. During crises, honey serves roles that sugar and other sweeteners cannot fully replace. It provides quick energy when meals are smaller. It helps preserve foods when refrigeration becomes unreliable. It soothes illness, supports wound care, and boosts morale in ways few shelf-stable foods can. These uses make honey valuable beyond calories. That is why it has been traded and protected throughout history during shortages and conflict. Another reason honey disappears quickly is trust. When fear spreads, people look for foods they believe are pure and reliable. Honey feels safe, natural, familiar. That emotional response drives panic buying long before real scarcity appears. Once that wave begins, shelves empty rapidly, and prices climb beyond what most families expect. Institutions understand honey as value. Aid organizations, emergency planners, and bulk buyers move early. They secure supply quietly, leaving less for everyday shoppers. By the time the public notices shortages, the remaining honey is either low quality, overpriced, or already gone. People often tell themselves they will buy honey later. They assume it will always be there. That assumption ignores reality. Honey production cannot suddenly increase, and once supply tightens, recovery is slow. Prices stay high long after the initial crisis fades. Preparing now means seeing honey for what it truly is, not a treat, but a tool. It supports energy, health, and resilience when systems fail. Waiting until fear makes its value obvious turns an easy decision into a hard lesson. When honey becomes hard to find, it is a sign that people are no longer thinking about comfort. They are thinking about survival. Acting before that shift gives you quiet security when others are scrambling. Hope is not a plan, and waiting has never protected anyone when systems begin to fail. Food shortages do not arrive with warnings or deadlines. They creep in quietly, one item at a time, until choices disappear. What you have heard is not meant to scare you, but to wake you up. The power to protect your future still exists, but only for those who act before panic spreads. Start small, start today, and take control while you still can. When the crisis becomes obvious to everyone, it will already be too late.